Eleanor Brooks had always assumed that her achievements would shield her from life's toughest challenges. But everything changed one quiet evening as she made her way home from work. Pulled over for no apparent reason by two police officers, her high-end car was soon reduced to a smoldering ruin, the officers coldly watching as the flames engulfed everything she had worked so hard for. She stood there, powerless and uncertain, as the fire consumed her past, unsure of what would happen next. Just when all hope seemed lost, a familiar voice broke through the chaos. "What the hell are you doing?" It was Mike Tyson. But why was he there, and could he possibly do anything to stop the madness? Before we go any further, drop a comment below to let us know where you're reading from. On a calm Friday evening, Eleanor Brooks, a successful entrepreneur, wrapped up her workday and left the office. Sliding into the leather seats of her luxury car, she couldn't help but look forward to a peaceful weekend with her husband, Charles. What she didn't realize was that this would be anything but a normal night. Driving through a quiet street on the outskirts of town, Eleanor noticed two police cars pull in behind her, their flashing lights illuminating the rearview mirror in a mix of red and blue. She hadn't been speeding, nor had she broken any laws, yet the officer's presence felt unsettling. Her pulse quickened as she slowly pulled over, sensing that something wasn't right. The officers approached, one on the driver's side, the other on the passenger's side. Without offering an explanation or a greeting, they ordered Eleanor out of the car. She hesitated, but the harsh tone in their voices left her no choice. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked, trying to remain composed. Without responding, they yanked her out of the car, tossing her roughly to the pavement. Eleanor gasped as her dress tore at the edges, and the sound of mocking laughter came from one of the officers. Confusion flooded her mind, but she was too shocked to react. As the officers rifled through her car, tossing items aside in a frenzy, they taunted her with cruel remarks. "Think you're better than the rest of us, huh? Just another rich lady in her fancy car." Trying to stay composed, Eleanor stood there, helpless, as they began vandalizing her car. The officers weren't just searching, they were deliberately destroying it. Then she heard the unmistakable sound of a match being struck. Before she could even react, one of the officers hurled it into her car. In an instant, the vehicle was engulfed in flames. Eleanor's heart dropped as she watched her car burn, the acrid scent of charred leather and metal filling the air. She stood frozen, unable to do anything as the fire consumed her property. The officers remained indifferent, seemingly uncaring about the destruction they had just caused. The officers couldn't help but chuckle as they strolled back to their patrol cars, leaving Eleanor standing there, stunned and helpless. The sound of their laughter echoed in the air as the fire continued to rage, consuming everything she had worked for. Just as the flames reached their peak, a voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the source of the voice. To her astonishment, there, stepping out from the shadows, was none other than Mike Tyson, the iconic boxer. His presence was magnetic, his eyes burning with anger. Alone, but exuding an undeniable aura of strength, he stood tall, showing no fear. One of the officers snapped, "Who the hell are you?" clearly thrown off by the sudden appearance of the stranger. "I'm someone who doesn't stand by when injustice happens," Tyson answered, his voice calm but laced with intensity. The officers faltered for a moment, caught off guard. They didn't immediately recognize him. At first, he looked like just another person on the street. But as the realization hit, the shift in their posture was subtle but noticeable. Still, they weren't backing down. Eleanor, still reeling from the shock, felt a flicker of hope. Could this nightmare finally be over? Before anything else could unfold, Tyson stepped forward, his gaze locking onto the officers. "What you did here is disgraceful," he said, his voice unwavering. "This woman did nothing to deserve this. You're abusing your power, and that's not how justice works." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them reached into his pocket for a notepad, scribbling something down, clearly rattled by the confrontation. But Tyson wasn't done yet. He turned to Eleanor, his tone softening. "Are you okay?" Her voice shook as she responded, I don't know. I don't know what to do." "Don't worry," Tyson said gently. "You're not alone." As the officers stood there, uncertain and clearly uncomfortable with the situation, Tyson made a decisive move. "I'm calling this in," he announced firmly, pulling out his phone with swift determination. He dialed a number and spoke into the device with authority. "Yeah, it's me," he said. "Get someone down here. This isn't just an assault. This is racism, abuse of power, and a whole lot more." The officers exchanged anxious glances, feeling the control they once had slip away. But Mike Tyson was far from finished. A few minutes later, a group of higher-ranking officers arrived, along with an official from the local Human Rights Commission. They immediately began questioning the two officers responsible for the incident. The situation was tense, but it was clear that Mike Tyson's intervention had turned the tide. The new arrivals weren't buying the officers' story. The witnesses who had gathered to watch the scene unfold began speaking up, detailing what they had seen. The officers, realizing they were no longer in control, were starting to panic. As the tension in the air grew thick, one of the officers who had been involved in the assault looked over at Mike Tyson, his eyes wide with fear. It was clear they had underestimated the gravity of the situation. But just as the new officers began to discuss what to do next, the worst possible thing happened. Eleanor's husband, Charles Brooks, arrived. Charles, who had been away on business, was the last person anyone had expected to show up. As soon as he saw his wife standing there, the truth of what had happened washed over him. Charles was a man with deep connections, both in business and with the law. He was calm, composed, and perhaps the most powerful ally in the room. When he saw the look of fear in his wife's eyes, his face hardened. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice cold and commanding. Eleanor didn't have the strength to answer, so she just pointed to her car, now completely engulfed in flames. Charles turned back to the officers and calmly asked, "Who did this?" One of the officers, visibly sweating, stammered, We thought—" Charles cut him off. "You thought what? That you could get away with it because she's a black woman in a nice car? Is that it?" The officers remained silent. But when Charles revealed his identity, as the owner of a chain of multi-million-dollar businesses and a well-respected philanthropist, the atmosphere shifted. The higher-ranking officers, who had been quietly observing, suddenly became more attentive. They had no choice but to listen. Charles's anger was palpable. "I'll make sure every last one of you is held accountable for this. You have no idea what kind of storm you've just unleashed." What followed next was a whirlwind of legal battles. The incident with the police officers went viral, thanks to Mike Tyson's intervention and the media attention it garnered. People across the country, particularly in the black community, rallied behind Eleanor and Charles, condemning the officer's actions. Eleanor had never been one for public attention, but now she found herself at the center of a national conversation. The truth about what happened spread quickly, and the police officers involved were placed on administrative leave as an investigation was launched. Mike Tyson's involvement also brought his own personal experiences with racial profiling to light, which sparked a broader dialogue about racism in law enforcement. He became a key figure in the movement for justice, and his bold actions that night served as a catalyst for reform in the local police department. For Eleanor, it wasn't just about her car or the damage done to her property. It was about standing up to the system that had tried to break her. It was about showing the world that people like her wouldn't be intimidated or silenced. She became a symbol of resilience and strength, and her story inspired many. While the officers faced disciplinary action, the emotional toll on Eleanor was immense. The trauma of what had happened couldn't be undone, but she found solace in the support of her husband, the media coverage that shed light on the issue, and the community that rallied around her. Charles remained by her side through the legal battles and public scrutiny, offering unwavering support. But the question remained: what would happen to the officers who had done this? Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, they tried to defend themselves. They claimed they had been acting in accordance with procedure, but the video footage and eyewitness testimony told a different story. As the investigation continued, it became clear that their actions had crossed a line. The system they had abused for so long was finally being held accountable. The final chapter of this story unfolded in the courtroom. The officers involved in the assault were charged with misconduct and abuse of power, but the most surprising turn of events came when one of the officers, in a tearful testimony, revealed that he had been influenced by his own prejudices and the deep-seated bias within the police department. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, and many were left questioning how deep the problem really went. The officer, in his moment of vulnerability, expressed regret for what he had done, but it was clear that the damage had been done. Eleanor, standing tall, addressed the court. "I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here for change. I'm here because no one should ever have to face what I faced, simply because of the color of their skin." As the case concluded, the officers were dismissed from the force, but it was the broader changes that mattered most. In the aftermath of the trial, reforms were set in motion, aimed at addressing systemic racism and ensuring that such an event would never happen again. If you enjoyed the story of Eleanor and her courageous fight against discrimination, don't miss the next one. Click here to watch another inspiring tale.